Workbenches can take up a ton of space in the shop, and they need to work hard for you. As you see, this workbench has tons of versatility, and not only is it mobile and has a large work surface with T-Track installed, but there are a lot of unique storage opportunities for you to customize it to what you need in your shop. So today I'm going to show you how to build this very efficient workbench. The first step in building this bench is to construct the frame, and the first thing I'm going to do there is rough cut my 4x4s. Now next up, this step is optional, but I decided to go ahead and joint and plane all of the 4x4s so that way they're as straight and true as possible. Now that the lumber's been milled, I'm going to cut these to their final lengths. Now I'm laying out for joinery to bring this frame together. Now this might be pretty obvious for some of y'all, but I saw one of my friends disconnect the front from the main body of his domino so that way it was easier to set up for the depth of mortises. I thought that was pretty smart, and it was a lot easier. I know some of y'all don't have the domino, and that's no big deal. You can still build this bench with pocket hole screws, dowels, or even hand-cut joinery. This project is sponsored by my friends over at Bessie Tools, and these EHK trigger clamps come in really handy when I'm doing things like this in the shop. So I've just finished cutting for the dominoes and all of the horizontal pieces. Now I'm going to switch and start cutting the dominoes in each one of the legs. Now you will notice that I'm changing the depth here, and the reason for that is I cut shallower mortises in the inside corner, and then I'm going to be cutting a deeper mortise in the outside. To assemble the frame for this bench, I'm going to start by putting together the two ends, and then once those are cured, I'm going to add the longer horizontal stretchers. You may have noticed that I'm using two different length dominoes at these joints, and those details are spelled out in the plans. Once everything is knocked together with my dead blow hammer, I put the assembly into my K-body Revo clamps until the glue cures. With both ends finished up, now it's time to add those longer horizontal stretchers, and this is where the fun really begins. I'm not sure if I'm building a workbench frame or a piece of workout equipment, but regardless, I think a second set of hands might have been helpful for this step. For the final stage of this assembly, I had to break out the extenders for my K-body Revo clamps because I don't have any that are quite long enough for the full width of this bench. Whether you're working out of a large workshop or a small one-bay garage, having mobility for your workbench is very helpful. Next up is to start ripping down the 3/4 plywood to build out the internal panels for this workbench. Now watch out people, this is a controversial cut. Some people will tell you that you can absolutely never cross cut on the table saw like this, but to do this I just keep even pressure against the fence and I've never had a problem. Now the bottom line is, if you're not comfortable making that cut, don't do it. A really good alternative to making a cross cut on the table saw is using something like the Craig ACS. The notch that I'm marking out and cutting here is so that this panel can sit in between two of the 4x4s. To attach all of these panels to the workbench frame, I'm going with pocket hole screws. These 2x4s serve a few purposes. One of them is to add stability and rigidity to the bench. The other one is to give an anchoring point for some of these internal panels. While I'm installing these remaining panels, you'll see that I'm using two clamps. One is adding clamping pressure to hold the panel in place, and the other one I'm using as a stop to keep the inside of the panel flush with the inside of the 4x4. Now I'm cutting slots with my biscuit joiner for Z-clips that will hold the workbench top to the frame. For the top layer of this workbench, I went with black melamine. Here I'm roughly trimming the black melamine to size, and I'm doing this just so that this process with my trim router doesn't throw as much dust in the shop, because melamine dust is just awful. Now it's time to add some solid wood trim to our workbench top. And we're doing this to make the edges more durable, because plywood and melamine, if something bumps into it, it's going to get chipped and get damaged. Using a solid wood for the edging is just going to make your bench that much more durable. I'm cutting these strips wider than they need to be, and once they're installed on the table, I use a flush trim bit in my router to cut it flush with the top and bottom surface of my workbench. In an effort to protect the melamine from getting damaged by the bearing on the router bit, I put down some of this yellow painter's tape, and it actually did a really good job. Alright, now we're moving on to one of my favorite features of this workbench, and that is all the T-track that's in the top. I used some long cutoffs of plywood as a guide for my router. I used the Rockler T-track in this workbench, and they make these really cool 3-inch sections for all of your intersections. The trouble is I didn't order enough of those, so I had the pleasure of cutting all of the miters myself. To install the T-track, I'm using number 6 1-inch long screws, and those are long enough to secure the T-track through the melamine into that lower plywood layer. Alright, moving on, it is time to make some drawers. For these I went with 1/2-inch plywood for the box and then 1/4-inch plywood for the drawer bottom. I like cutting the groove for the drawer bottom on my router table, but you can certainly use a table saw to cut this groove just fine. To assemble the drawer boxes, I went with pocket holes again, but since this is 1/2 inch thick material, if you go this route, make sure that you're using the drill for 1/2 inch thick material. To install the drawer slides for this bench, I first started by setting the slide on top of a scrap piece of 3/4 inch ply. Once the slide was attached to the bench, I then set the drawer box on top of some 1/4 inch scraps and then secured the slide to the drawer box. With the first drawer installed, I use that as a reference point, and then I'm using a stack of plywood cutoffs to set the location of the remaining slides. Next up, I use this little jig from Craig to drill the holes for the drawer pulls. To attach the drawer front, I use a small stack of playing cards under the left and right sides of the drawer front. Next, I clamp it in place and drill through the previously drilled holes for the drawer pull hardware. Once the drawer pull is attached, I then run 2 number 6 by 1 inch screws through the drawer box into the back side of the drawer front. So, grab the plans that are linked below, and if you need a dedicated outfeed table for your table saw, make sure to check the video that's coming up in the end cards. I have plans for that one as well.